Welcome to the 7th lesson. So throughout the lessons we've covered, we've explored how researchers formulate research questions, select appropriate methodologies, collect data, analyze evidence. However, good research is not judged solely by the quality of the methods or originality of the findings. Research must be ethical. Ethics is not simply about obtaining approval from a research ethics committee or completing institutional forms. It's about respecting the dignity, rights, and well-being of every individual and community that contributes to the research. As researchers, we frequently work with people who may experience poverty, unemployment, disability, trauma, migration-related issues, illnesses, or other forms of vulnerability. Ethical research therefore requires more than technical competence. It requires integrity, accountability, empathy, and a commitment to protecting those who make research possible. In these introductory lessons we've had and the discussions we've had, and particularly today, I want us to focus on the fundamental ethical principles that underpin research involving human participants, human beings. More advanced ethical issues such as participatory ethics, ethics of care, decolonial ethics, and ethical dilemmas in community-engaged research will be explored later in the program. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the importance of research ethics, describe the principle of informed consent, distinguish confidentiality from anonymity, explain the importance of protecting privacy, evaluate the balance between benefits and risks, and understand the ethical responsibilities of researchers. Why ethics matters. Research depends upon public trust. Participants voluntarily share their experiences, opinions, personal information, and sometimes highly sensitive aspects of their lives. Without trust, meaningful research would be impossible to do. History reminds us why ethics is necessary. Across the world, unethical research has exposed participants to unnecessary and avoidable harm through deception, coercion, discrimination, and exploitation. These experiences led universities, governments, professional organizations to establish ethical principles that guide responsible research. Today, every research project involving human participants must demonstrate that participants will be treated with dignity, fairness, and respect. Ethics is therefore not an administrative hurdle. It is an essential component of good research. Ethical review. Before collecting data, researchers are generally required to obtain approval from an institutional ethics committee. Here at the University of Johannesburg, your proposals will serve at the Faculty Research Ethics Committee. Strangely, I sit on the panel, but I do not have influence over the feedback that each one of you will individually get. It is important that human participants and research involving human participants complies with the university's ethical guidelines. The ethics committee does not evaluate whether the study is interesting. Instead, it asks the questions such as, are participants adequately protected? Have potential risks been identified? Are the anticipated benefits sufficient to justify the research? Will personal information be handled responsibly? And in line with that, you'll be required to complete a POPIA form as part of your proposal as well. Does the study comply with legal and institutional requirements? Obtaining ethical clearance demonstrates that an independent body has reviewed the proposed study and has considered it ethically acceptable. Informed consent. Perhaps the most fundamental principle of research ethics is informed consent. Participants should never be involved in research unless they understand exactly what participation means. Researchers therefore have a responsibility to provide participants with sufficient information to make an informed decision. Participants should understand the purpose of the study, why they've been invited to participate, what participation will involve, how much time participation will require, any potential risks or discomforts, any anticipated benefits, how the information will be used, how confidentiality will be protected, and who to contact if they have questions or concerns. Only after receiving this information should participants decide whether they wish to participate. Consent should never be regarded as merely a signature on a form. It is an ongoing process of communication between the researcher and participant. Importantly, there is voluntary participation. So closely related to informed consent is the principle of voluntary participation. Participants must always be voluntary. Researchers must never coerce, force, manipulate, or pressure individuals into participating. Participants also have the right to decline participation, refuse to answer particular questions, and withdraw from the study at any stage without penalty. The principle is particularly important when researchers occupy positions of authority. For example, lecturers should avoid recruiting their own students. Supervisors should avoid recruiting their own postgrad candidates, and employers should exercise greater caution when conducting research involving employees. Power relations can unintentionally undermine genuine voluntary participation. Researchers must therefore minimize any possibility of perceived coercion. Exceptions to informed consent. In exceptional circumstances, researchers may seek permission to conduct research without obtaining prior informed consent. Examples include certain forms of behavioral observation or psychological research where informing participants beforehand would fundamentally alter the behavior of people being studied. It's important to note that in this course and the nature of research we do, this will highly be unlikely. And any decision around participation and informed consent must be clearly articulated. And the decisions are made by Research Ethics Committee and are never left solely to the discretion of individual researchers. There is beneficence and non-maleficence. Ethical risks seek to maximize benefits while minimizing harm. This principle is often described as meaning to beneficence, meaning the obligation to promote good, non-maleficence, meaning the obligation to avoid causing harm. So researchers should continually ask, what benefits will this research produce? Who will benefit? What are the anticipated risks? How can the risks be reduced? Benefits may include improved public policy, better services, increased knowledge, community empowerment, improvements in professional practice. Potential harms may include emotional distress, embarrassment, financial costs, inconvenience, reputational damage, social stigma, as well as psychological risk, even physical risk. Researchers should therefore design studies to minimize these risks where possible. Risk assessment. No research is completely free of risk. Even completing a questionnaire requires participants to invest time and effort. However, researchers should ensure that the anticipated benefits justify any risks participants may experience. For example, interviewing survivors of violence may generate important knowledge for improving public policy. However, discussing traumatic experiences may also cause emotional distress. Researchers should therefore consider whether sensitive questions are necessary, whether psychological support should be available, whether interviews should be stopped if participants become distressed, and how researchers themselves will respond ethically to difficult situations. Ethics therefore requires careful planning before data collection begins. There's also confidentiality. Researchers often know the identities of participants. The principle of confidentiality requires researchers to protect this information. Confidentiality means that although the researcher knows the participants or people who participated, that information is not disclosed to others without permission. Researchers usually protect the confidentiality by removing names from transcripts, assigning participant codes, using pseudonyms, storing data, and limiting access to identifiable information. In publications, participants generally are referred to using pseudonyms such as participant 4 or even fictitious names. This protects participants from unnecessary exposure. When confidentiality may not apply, there are exceptional circumstances where participants may choose to be identified. For example, research involving senior government officials, organizational leaders, or recognized experts may require participants to speak in their official capacities. In such cases, participants should explicitly give consent to being identified. The decision should always rest with the participant rather than the researcher. Then there is anonymity. Confidentiality should not be confused with anonymity. Anonymity exists where the researcher does not know the participant's identity. For example, an anonymous online survey that collects no names, identification numbers, or contact details may prevent the researcher from identifying individual respondents or participants. Anonymous research provides an additional level of transparency because identities cannot be disclosed if they were never collected. Focus groups present a particular ethical challenge. Although the researcher may promise confidentiality, participants hear one another's contributions. Researchers therefore cannot guarantee that the other participants will keep the information confidential after the discussion ends. Participants should therefore be informed of this limitation before agreeing to participate. Researchers should encourage all group members to respect confidentiality while recognizing the complete control is impossible. Then privacy. Privacy refers to the personal information researchers request from participants. Researchers should collect only the information that is genuinely necessary to answer the research question. For example, if a study examines municipal service delivery, asking participants about their HIV status would almost certainly be inappropriate unless there's a clear methodological justification. Similarly, researchers should avoid collecting identity numbers, unnecessary contact details, banking information, medical history, or other highly personal information, unless such is essential to the research. Respecting privacy reduces unnecessary intrusion into people's lives. Data protection. Researchers should also have ethical and legal responsibilities regarding data management. In South Africa, personal information must be managed in accordance with the Protection of Personal Information Act, or PIA, which I mentioned earlier. Researchers should therefore ensure that electronic files are password protected, paper records are securely stored, access is restricted to authorized researchers, identifiable information is removed wherever possible, and data are retained and destroyed according to institutional policies. Protecting research data is an ethical obligation, as always a legal requirement. Ethics in the age of AI. Increasingly, researchers use AI to assist with data management and analysis. Researchers should exercise particular caution when working with confidential information. Sensitive research data should never be uploaded to external AI systems unless institutional policies explicitly permit this and appropriate safeguards are in place. Regardless of the technology's use, responsibility for ethical decision-making always remains with the researcher. In short, research ethics provides the moral foundation for responsible scholarship. Ethical researchers must respect dignity, right, and well-being of those who participate in their studies. The principles I've discussed above ensure that research contributes not only to knowledge, but also the well-being of individuals and communities. Next is the final lesson, which we turn our attention to community engaged and rigorous intervention research, where we explore how researchers work collaboratively with communities to design, implement, and evaluate interventions that contribute to meaningful social change. Thank you.